Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for joining us tonight. My name is Catherine Mancy. I'm the Public Programming and Community Engagement Librarian, and I manage the Artist Residency here at Georgia Tech. And I am so excited to have you all here for the celebration of Deanna's site installation, Watermark. Deanna Sirlin has served as our first Georgia Tech Library Artist in Residence during this semester, spring 2022, and we are so excited to have her here with us this evening to share a little bit about her process and how she creates her pieces. But first, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Georgia Tech Library Artist in Residence. So this brand new program was created as the library embarked on a huge renovation of our building and reimagination of our services to support the research enterprise as well as well-being of students here on the Georgia Tech's campus. And we envisioned that this library artist in residence would embark on an artistic and aesthetic exploration of the role of libraries in society through arts-based programming, along with the creation of a piece during their tenure here at the Georgia Tech Library. And this is exactly what Deanna has done this semester. So we started the semester with a drop-in collage workshop titled Mapping the Text that was open 24/7 in a room in the library throughout the end of January and beginning of February. And then in March, Deanna taught a Photoshop workshop that was creative titled Science Fictions in Real Time, where she taught students how to make science fiction tableaus in Photoshop. Finally, we recently hosted a Image to Realization workshop with students, staff, and faculty here at Georgia Tech, where students physically layered on top of altered photography to create new works. And these workshops mirrored Deanna's process of the movement between physical and technological creation of art. And this was our hope, is that Deanna's engagement with the campus community would help students gain insight into the creative process. So in addition to all of that work, Deanna also has created this piece here behind me titled Watermark. And I'll let her talk more about this evening. But before I pass it to her, I want to tell you a little bit more about Deanna and her background. So Deanna Sirlin began her art education at the Brooklyn Museum Art School. She earned her BA from the State University of New York at Albany and her MFA in painting from Queens College. Sirlin is a Yaddo Fellow, and in 2016 was a Rothko Foundation International Painting Symposium Artist in Residence. In both 2019 and 2022, Sirlin has served as an artist in residence at the Cini Foundation in Venice, Italy. Though primarily a painter, Sirlin adopts any medium that allows her to explore the relationships color has with form, composition, and the physical environment, as you can see here. Her acrylic paintings exude a multitude of layers, building to vibrant, complex textural surfaces, and her process sometimes involves manipulating a surface, allowing natural forces like gravity to affect the paint. Action is important in her mark making. Her brush is an extension of her body. The fluid brush strokes that often are the first elements of her paintings to catch the eye, but she also works in collage and sculpture. She creates public murals and writes extensively about art and has adopted her imagery by using digital technology to create monumental works embedded in glass for windows, covering buildings in the United States, Italy, Tuscany, and France. Sirlin has said, I think in terms of color, density, and movement, and the movement and stroke of light. She endeavors to make work that reflects the way she likes to live. She has said, for me, making art is a search of self. With each stroke, I am rediscovering, circulating, and rearticulating myself. I continually dig deeper, but most of all, these works express to me the pleasure of being in the world. I am reinventing that happiness in the language of painting. I hope you can see that here in this piece. I also want to mention that Deanna's work has been shown in solo and group exhibitions in the United States, France, Italy, Great Britain, Germany, Turkey, Latvia, China, and probably more that I didn't list. And in 2020, she had a large solo exhibition in Évora, Portugal. Her new installation, so the one in addition to this, titled Borders of Light and Water, will be on exhibition for the 59th Annual Biennale d'Art. So we're lucky to have Deanna here tonight before she jets off to Venice to show her next site installation. So Deanna, we're happy to welcome you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Catherine, very much for that terrific introduction. I want to thank a few people who've helped create this artist in residency to begin with. And one of the things I want to tell you is that as an artist, I always say, it takes a village to raise a child, but it takes a city to raise an artist. And Atlanta, I'm very happy to say, is beginning to become that city that can raise artists. So I want to thank Leslie Sharp, the Dean of Libraries, for her unwavering support of this residency at the library. Of course, Catherine Mancy, who is the public art librarian, public programming librarian, stand corrected, and her team of Kurt Henderson, Jason Wright, Charlie Bennett, David Tate, Allison Valk, Katie Gentiledo, and Jesus Gomez Prado. The Georgia Tech employees that made the drop-in workshops possible, Gerald Mobley, Thomas Testoni, Kim Sheldon, Kimberly Goler-Stubbs, and the Georgia Tech facilities team and Sam Graham for working with us on the installation. Charlie Parker for helping us move the procurement process, and Dr. Andrew Saylor for lending his words to this installation. The team of people that conceived of this residency years ago, the former Provost Ross, Amit Doshi, and former Dean Catherine Murray Rust. I also want to thank my colleagues who've been working with me at Color Chrome Atlanta for 22 years now. John Rhodes, Kristen Maryland, Chuck Treadle, and Matt Copeland. It really does take a team. And of course, my art installers, Mike Jensen and Mike Stancy, who I have to say I've worked with Mike Jensen for 22 years as well. And that's something. And he never complains, by the way. I don't know how he's worked with me for 22. I ask him to do all kinds of things, and he says, okay. Okay. So when Catherine contacted me and we first discussed what it meant to be an artist in residence at a library, I had to think about how libraries have changed. And they certainly have changed a lot. It's not the place where you go and browse the shelves or take out a book, although I think you still can. But it's become a place of reflection, thought, research, and inspiration. So that's where I started. I also started with these steps, by the way, which I saw and I said, this is a fantastic piece of architecture. What a wonderful thing that a library has created this space for students to sit and be quiet or noisy or just to be in the library. But how did a painter like myself get involved in the digital realm? I'm going to tell you it wasn't simple. And it was maybe part of it was that I realized actually in my first digital piece was actually at Georgia Tech. It was, I'll give the plug if there's anyone here from Fulton County, commissioned me to do 6 animated works, paintings, on the then Georgia Tech light board that was still in the same place, but it was an old light board. And what's amazing about that light board is that, and also me, is that I didn't even know how to use a mouse in 1996. So they gave me a graduate student from computational sciences, poor boy. I don't know what he's doing today. Maybe he's killed the computer. But he was my helper. And first thing he had to do is teach me how to use the mouse. And this computer, by the way, is the Georgia Tech Light Board in '96, is not the Georgia Tech Light Board that exists now. It's the one over 7585. And my concept was, by the way, that everyone was going to get stuck in traffic during the Olympics, and they were going to have to watch my paintings. But that's not what happened, actually, because everyone was so scared about the traffic, everyone took public transportation. However, I think people still saw my work because they would say, I would meet them, and they'd say, oh yes, I know your work. And I'm thinking, how do they know my work? But I also loved this idea of transformation and translation of painting into a new technology. And that computer, by the way, was the outside was a Commodore computer. Does anyone remember those? Maybe they even have one here in the library. But on the inside, that student was so bored with me, he actually took the back off. And he started, I remember this. I was like, what are you doing? He said, it's okay. And that it was something jerry-rigged on the inside. So you can imagine. So that's where I began. A pivotal piece for mine was when I was commissioned by the High Museum to do my piece Retracings, which fit over all the windows of the Meyer building, which overlooked Peachtree Street. And one of the things I'll just tell you about the process of this, of thinking about this, is that I decided that painting was getting overlooked, that in our dialogue. And that piece was actually conceived in 1999 and realized in 2000. And that I wanted painting to enter the physical space of the viewer. And I decided I wanted to make my paintings transparent and put it on all the windows of that Meyer building on the second, third, and fourth floors. Well, anyone can make things big, but at the time, I also said I don't want any pixels. I was anti-pixels. So I luckily met John Rhodes, who assured me that he could do this. I have to tell you, he didn't know how to do this. He spent the entire summer with his team. I think they were calling each other. He was in Jamaica, figuring out how to do this. And basically, he told me he mixed software. Because I said, well, I hope you know, he was really also the patron for that work. And I said, I hope you can make a lot of money from this. He said, Deanna, it's like mixing Coke and Pepsi. It's not a new product. I can't sell that. So a little bit about my history, though, as an artist. Catherine said I went to the Brooklyn Museum Art School, and I grew up in Brooklyn. And you can probably still hear that in my accent. I told Jason, the wonderful stop-action video has an audio component. I said, oh, gosh, I sound so much like Brooklyn. I thought I'd lost that after all these years in the South, but I guess you can't lose it all. But the Brooklyn Museum Art School was very important to me. And actually, one of the things that I think about, I went there from the time I was 5, and I would get dropped off at the entrance, and I would run through the African art galleries where, at the time, it's not like this anymore, there were 4 40-foot totems that were at the crossroads of where I had to walk through. And it was very darkly and dramatically lit. And I have to tell you, I found those sculptures incredibly powerful. And later, when I thought about being a public artist, I realized that those were public art, that they were made for a community, that they addressed a community, and what power they have. So that's where I began. This piece, by the way, also people have asked me, what is this made out of? And it's actually a Cibachrome transparency, which is a medium I haven't used in a while, this transparent. But we decided to do that for Georgia Tech. And my reasoning is that I really wanted the piece to be a kind of lens for the viewer to see through the work that would alter what they see and how they perceive the world. I did a piece for Flux Projects in, 2012. I hope that's right, where I covered 12 lofts, windows in Castleberry with an orange film. And the idea was that it was about community, and that at 9 o'clock when it got dark, everyone was supposed to turn on their lights, and there would be this kind of pixelation of orangeness in Castleberry. Well, yeah, that happened, but what really happened was the interior reception of the people who had given over their apartments and had this orange film, and how it changed their perception of the world, and how it was so warm. It was a real golden light. And I remember when we removed them, also it became so blue in the room. So it was also about color as well. And color is obviously, as a painter, very important to me. But it was also about that I changed their perception by this transparent color. Okay. So color, of course, is part of my language as a painter. And this piece in particular has a real nostalgic color. For me, this is the color of the 1960s. It is absolutely, I wore these colors. I wore the dresses that totally look like this. What amused me recently, and I love so much, was a great hero of mine is Piet Mondrian. And Yves Saint Laurent actually was allowed to make dresses in the style of Mondrian that are owned by the Metropolitan Museum. It's also in response to the collection of 50 years of science fiction. And part of this conversation, some of the people know here that I have for the past 15 years had high school art students in my studio. And my relationship with them, and the kind of conversations that we have. First of all, people say, what do they do for you? And I say, they do whatever I do. If I'm stretching canvas, they're stretching canvas. If I'm cleaning brushes, they're cleaning brushes. If I'm, they don't write for me. I'm sorry, they don't do that. I wish they could. But one of the conversations that came up that I found really interesting was they would talk to me about a dystopian idea of reality and the relationship in science fiction between the utopian and the dystopian. And when I started to think about the collection here, which was given by Dr. Bud Foote, that how could this influence my work? How can I think about the work? And the first thing that I thought about, besides the idea of the dystopian, is the color. And that there's a particular color palette of science fiction. And that's also where this palette came from. The other thing that I realized, and also because of my work in Venice, was that probably the most important issue of our century is climate change. And if you think about science fiction literature, it talks about it. I think that Dune talks about it quite a lot. And that how fragile our cities are, particularly Venice, but also levels of water. So there's a very famous, you're going to say, where did Watermark come from? There's a very famous book by Joseph Brodsky who writes about Venice. And the book is titled Watermark. So all these things were filtering into my consciousness. I have to say that one of your colleagues here at Tech, who is a civil water engineer, met with me, and I have to tell you, he upset me so much about climate change that I threw my back out when I got home. So, I think, though, it's important. It's okay that, no, it's not really okay that I threw my back out, but but I think that we all need to think about this concept of what our planet is doing and how we're affecting it. So also, I want to tell you a little bit about the actual process of how I make this work, because it's a little complicated, and I know I could get there a different way, but I don't think it would be the same. And every artist has their process. So I'm a painter. I start with a painting. I start with a painting that's a gestural painting that is very much connected to my relationship to the paint, to the color of the paint, and the physicality of the stroke on the canvas. Each stroke has its own particular measurement. and space between. If you look at the titles of many of my paintings, they actually are titled "The Spaces Between" or "Measure." It's no coincidence because I'm always reaching into my own ideas to title work. Okay, the painting exists. Did I destroy the painting? Why do I destroy the painting? Well, I don't know if you've ever worked on something. It could be anything that you're doing. But at a certain point you go, I don't really like this painting. I don't like this book. but I like this little part. So this is how this happened. I actually started cutting up the parts I liked out of one painting. And I love this fact that I could hold that piece of color and brushstroke and paint in my hand and rearrange it and create a new kind of map that is a new collage, actually. And I'll just tell you another little craziness secret, is that I actually use both sides of the canvas. So the first painting that I destroyed to make something new was on linen. And I realized, oh, there's this nice blue on this side. That's what I cut out. And then I flipped it over. Oh, there's this better colored tan. Of course, this is very dangerous because everything becomes part of the language that you want to use. It becomes that you cannot, everything you're digging into the recycling bin all the time. Or you buy a product and use dog cookies, and it comes in this fantastic yellow box. Well, I need that yellow. Eat the cookies, dogs. I need the box. Okay, so then we have a collage that has been made from the painting. I take that collage and then I enter it into the computer. And then I enlarge it by a factor between 30 and 50%. Sorry, so you can tell I'm a painter. I can't remember that word. And then when it's enlarged, I start layering the new layers that are sampled from the ideas of color, and in this case, from science fiction, that create this new piece. Then this new piece gets printed digitally as a C-print transparency. So what's up next? So I have a piece that's opening in Venice next week. You're all invited. It's called Borders of Light and Water. So I think you realize that it's still about climate change. And it's a piece that when you look through it, you're actually looking out onto the Grand Canal. So you see the water and you see the buildings. The Grand Canal is actually not that wide. You can see the buildings on the other side, and you can see movement just like here. You see students walking through this piece. But I think that this idea of this fragile city that may not be with us in 30 years is what I'm trying to call attention to through the lens of my art. So now, do we have any questions? Catherine's gonna, I know you must have.
Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to transition into a Q&A portion. So for people that are here in person, I tried to get these to everyone. We're texting in questions so that Deanna and I don't have to run up and down these stairs.
Or you can come down here. That would be great.
Or you're welcome to come down here. If you'd like to text in a question, you can text it to 404-426-1340.
And I'll tell you about one, while you're texting, I'll tell you about my next project, actually, that's going to happen, which is a 4 by 37-foot mural on the ground. Dorian McDuffie's here. It's my project with the city of Atlanta. This will be in Buckhead. And I'm very excited, actually, about having a painting that's physically integrated with the landscape. And it'll be on the ground. So anyone who wants to help me. So do we have any questions? Do you have a question for me, Catherine?
Not yet. I do. Well, I want to just say something very quickly because that popped up. When I think about this piece here and then the piece in Venice at the same time, former Provost Bross actually was part of a task force working on water management in Venice. So I like to imagine that maybe a student who will help us solve the problem of climate change is walking by through this piece here, and that one day their work will affect the buildings and the water in Venice. So that's a nice connection.
You want to tell them about the Mose project?
Yeah, tell us a little bit about that, and then I have a few other questions.
Well, I just want to say, so Professor Bross is actually one of the team that worked in Venice. He's a civil engineer, and he's the former provost of Georgia Tech, and he created the Mose project, which is this incredible thing because one of the real problems in Venice is acqua alta, which is high water. And the ocean's rising, the city floods. And it was very terrible, and I think it was November 2019. But they tweaked so that's why the Mose project actually exists. And I was told it's working, which is pretty amazing. And it's this structure in the middle of the lagoon that kind of rises up and stops the dam. That's why it's Mose as in Moses.
Okay, so I've got a question for you. Deanna, can you speak to this work in relation to stained glass practices?
The only thing I can say about stained glass, because I'm not a stained glass artist, I never have been a stained glass artist, is that I remember actually I was artist in residence for the city of Nuremberg, Germany, which is a sister city to Atlanta, by the way. And I remember they brought all the artists from all the sister cities into this sort of hallway in a church. I don't know what it's called. I don't know. And it was very boring, and it was in German, and I didn't understand it. But there was this reflection through a little piece of stained glass, and it was this little piece of green, and it just hit the wall, and it kind of flickered, it kind of moved, and that's all I paid attention to. So I love stained glass, but I don't think this is stained glass.
Well, speaking of medium, I have a question for you from the audience. So what would you say is the medium of this installation? And what is the medium of this piece, like the original piece, to you?
Well, two things. One, I want to just say that the projection, and I'm sorry it's not doing it, you'll just have to come back to it when the sun is pouring through those windows, is equal to the piece. Okay, so that's one. The piece is actually a C-print transparency, and that's what it physically is. But I'm going to tell you one other thing that Catherine is not happy about, is that when we take this piece down, it will be destroyed. It will not exist. And I have to tell you, the first time I did that was in Portugal, for the show in Portugal. And we had to put it up in a particular way because the light in Portugal is so strong, and the windows heat up to something like 110 degrees during the summer. And that show was up for one full calendar year. It opened June 6th, and it closed June 6th, a year later. I don't know, I'm in pandemic time, so I don't know what years those were, but last year. And I decided that I was okay with that. That these transparencies don't need to be rolled up in my studio. They're site-specific anyway. They're only for that one particular place. And maybe they should only exist for that moment and in the memory of the people who've seen it.
Thank you.
Like a mandala.
Like a mandala, yeah. So culture inherently alters perception, and your art has been interpreted across cultures really powerfully. Can you describe the moment that your art was seen internationally for the first time? Do you remember?
Well, ironically, I think it was Venice. And that in 2000, is that right? So in 2000, I was invited to do a large work, 18 by 18 feet, for a library, for Ca' Foscari, which is the University of Venezia, and where it was a 15th century building, which they had built a glass facade, I think in the 70s or 80s so they could air condition the building. And it was a piece that you actually entered and exited through. It was concurrent with the Biennale. It was supposed to be only up for a month, and they kept it up for 17 years, which is quite lovely, except when they renovated the building once again, unfortunately the piece was destroyed. But I will tell you another secret about archiving this work. When the High Museum decided they wanted Retracings to be part of their collection, they said that the work, for them to collect a work of art, it had to exist in perpetuity. And I said, perpetuity? What? You mean if Michelangelo's drawing was offered to the museum, you'd say, I don't know, how long is this going to last? Anyway, we worked it out. And the way we worked it out was that the High Museum actually not only owns the physical work, which they can reinstall, but they own the file. And they made the commitment to keep the information up to date. Because I have to tell you, if they didn't put it in the cloud, I think it's on a CD. The other thing I will tell you about how much technology has changed, which you know, but when I made that piece in 2000 or 1999, it was 1 gigabyte of memory, and the computers at the fabricator had to put it on 3 computers, because now it could be on your phone, that information. But, and I will tell you that John Rhodes at Color Column had told me then, he said, Deanna, don't trust anyone. Put these things in the cloud. So, did I answer the question?
You did, yes. This is a question about your life as an artist. Did you ever struggle with the feeling that you had to stick with one medium or develop a certain level of success within one medium? Or did you always feel free to explore multiple mediums?
So, I've been a painter a long time. And I actually, from when I was in graduate school, I'm still friends with some of the people I was in graduate school with who are painters. And one of the things that, for me, is that I think that somehow embedded in my education, which was in upstate New York, there was a folk artist named Clarence Schmidt. And he took a house and he covered this whole house in mirrors. The windows had mirrors, the outside had mirrors. And I remember being taken there as a student. And I loved it. I thought, and I loved this teacher who said, I think the course was called Art as an Environment. Who knew, right? And I think somehow that opened a door but it's also about painting. I've always thought that I've watched too many people walk by paintings, not enter paintings. And I wanted a way for the viewer to be inside my work. And once that happened, and I'll say that Retracings, the piece at the High, was a pivotal work because it was the time that it allowed the viewer to be in my painting and to see my process. The one other thing I want to tell you is how that even came about. Where did I get this crazy idea that I wanted to multiply my paintings by a factor of 50 and no pixels? Well, I was actually teaching a workshop at the High with David Brenneman, and it was on Monet. There was a Monet show. And David is a very fine art historian, and he showed this image of a piece of Monet's painting under a microscope. And I looked at this piece of the painting. Once again, I'm interested in the macro and the micro, is that everything was revealed to me about Monet, much more than the whole painting. And somehow I wanted the viewer to see that in my own painting.
Well, we love that here. I mean, that really appealed to us, right? To be a college student, to go to your library, a place where sometimes it's kind of stressful, right? Because you're staying up all night, you're studying, and on your way in, you walk through a painting. What an experience. Thank you for bringing that to us. So speaking of this piece, and I'm curious about the connection of your painting to this piece, could you speak about the mix of sharply defined edges and the softened edges in Watermark? Well,
in some ways, I'm an old school formalist, which means that's what I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about those sharp edges. I'm thinking about the soft edges. I'm thinking about the value and saturation of the color. More than, let's just say not more than, but equal to the content. The content's informing the structure, but the physical making is from the formalist properties.
To dig a little deeper into this piece, you mentioned that these colors are really inspired by the 50 years of science fiction at Georgia Tech celebration, which is a celebration that we've had this year, and you were thinking about the 1960s and that color palette. Is there a connection between the colors of this piece and climate change?
Well, only in relation to science fiction, I will say. And it is fiction, I mean, right? I'm making a fiction. That's what the color palette is. But I will say that there are certain colors that were forbidden at a time when, as painters, like hot pink, and you can see that there's hot pink here, right? And there's lime green. And actually, I'm very happy there's Nicolette Rhyme is here tonight, and we did a show together which was called Emergency Orange. Because it was when I started to realize all those fluorescent colors were in our contemporary landscape and how they affected every other color. So those orange cones, the green vests, you know what I mean.
I love it. I love the orange and the pink. So in light of your work and your work in Venice, would you say that most of your pieces speak to these global issues like climate change? And do you consider your pieces a form of activism for issues like climate change?
Well, I think there's an act of repurposing and destruction in the creation of the collages that are reflective of these concepts of climate change. It's kind of the rupture of an idea.
Yeah. So pulling out a little bit, thinking about your pieces, you know, all over the globe, do you have a favorite that you've worked on? Or maybe a one that's really near and dear to your heart? Because favorite that's a strong word.
You know, I talked about this with other artists recently, and I have to tell you, and this is not a great answer, but I always like what I did last. And thank goodness, because then I can go on. If I liked something I did the best 20 years ago, I think I'd be in big trouble. So, but I think it's not just me. I think most artists feel this way. Anyone raise their hands if they agree? That the thing that you just did is your most personal and directed ideas. And hopefully they're the most satisfying.
So for students or attendees here that are not artists, what piece of advice would you give them to engage with the world creatively in the way that you are able to? What would you pass on to people? That's a hard question. So what piece of advice would you give to people? So I'm thinking about the workshops where you worked with students, you know, helping them to think creatively. What advice would you give?
Well, first of all, I have to tell you all that I was knocked out by the talent and creativity of the Georgia Tech students. I was really surprised considering you don't have an art department here. There is an incredible untapped resource. So, and a need because it's amazing to me what they produced. And that they understood everything that I said. So the advice about being an artist, is that what you're saying? Run, no. It's not, you know, we joke in our house, you know, there's that song, don't let your babies grow up to be cowboys. I say, don't let them grow up to be artists. It's not an easy thing. And the other thing I tell people who know me really well, you know, I think Joe Perugini asked me this, you know, I think 30 years ago or more, I told him I'm quitting. And recently he said, you know, Deanna, you never quit. You didn't quit. You told me 30 years ago you were going to quit. And I said, well, I still could. But the truth is, we're sucked in, right? We're sucked into this. Terry, go ahead, tell me.
Well, you don't mind speaking from here. You can hear me, right? I'm really interested in the installation that I saw, the video with with them installing the piece and then watching the speed at which they're installing, and in contrast with the light moving across the floor. And I was curious to know if that something that you do at every installation? Where you have
I'm going to repeat it.
the process, the application going on with the sun moving? Because I just thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, so I'll repeat for our people online. So we have a question about the installation. So here in person, we had a video that was sped up to show the installation. And as you see the piece go up, you watch the light and the color move around on the ground. And the question is Deanna, I think, do you always stay for an installation and kind of watch the light move around? Do you consider that when you're creating your pieces? I know the answer to this one.
You can answer. Yes, of course I do. But I will tell you even one further. There's a piece of mine that I finished in 2016 for a high school, a technical high school in Connecticut. And basically it was an old building that the state of Connecticut didn't have the money to build a new building, tear down the old one. It was like from the 1950s in cinder block. And they hired an architect who said, okay, we're going to build a new building around the old building. And you'll never even know that the old building was there, except that it'll be usable, like the gym. So little did I know when they hired me as the public artist that the architect also decided that all his architectural problems were going to be solved by me. And I mean, I'll tell you, even, you'll laugh, but I mean, in terms of my technical knowledge, I remember being on a phone call with them, and they said, well, Deanna can run the Conduit. And I'm like Googling, what's Conduit? And then I go, hey, I'm not running Conduit, I'm the artist. But I will tell you about that piece, though. So there's a long corridor which connects the old building and the new building, and it has no light. And it's a piece where actually it's 4 by 88 feet, and it has interactive LEDs that change as the students walk down the hall, and it changes in 300 different programs. Now, I did not do this. I worked with a wonderful collaborator who is an experimental musician and programmer. And actually, I said, could you do like 10 programs? He said, 10? Those students are going to kill you. We're doing 300. But what was magical to me is that when I was sitting and looking at the work, what Matthew Ostrowski had figured out how to do is he created the feeling of sunlight moving through the work. And so he understood exactly what you were talking about.
And I can attest to that. We spent many hours running around the library, sitting in different spaces, which leads me to another question I have for you. Can you speak a little bit about your work in relation to architecture and how you think about that?
Well, I always say the architecture is my silent partner, that I am always responding to it. So in each instance, so in this one in particular, I was really, if you go on the outside, there's all these horizontal, they call louvers. They're on the outside. And they're horizontal pieces. And so this building has a particular kind of grid that it's playing off against. And so, of course, I responded to that. So.
And beautifully so. So to kind of take us towards the end, what do you hope that people get from experiencing your pieces in the world? What do you hope that they take away?
Well, you did have that quote from me about joy, but I actually just want them to be in the work. I want them to enter the work and see the work and feel the work and experience the color and experience the world through the work. And hopefully during this very difficult time, that there's a little bit of healing from that.
Beautiful words to end on. So thank you all here in person. Thank you to our live stream.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you. Thank you to Deanna, and we'll be here for about 15 more minutes.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
If you have any questions, please come up and tell me what you really think.
Have a good evening.